kind of starting a new biography. We actually kind of introduced it. We'll actually look at that here in a second. But this is Jephthah. Of all the major judges, he is the most difficult to deal with. Now, Samson is pretty corrupt, but we can handle that sort of corruption. Jephthah, it is a difficult story, and there's, of course, one passage in particular that's going to take a lot of work for us to figure out. We won't get that far today. But we at least want to get through a good chunk of his biography, hopefully, today. So in order to understand what's happening here, we actually need to go back to where we left off a couple weeks ago, Judges chapter 10, verse 17 and 18. You remember chapter 10, the Ammonites are coming. So chapter 10 serves as or at least the latter part of chapter 10. It's sort of like an introduction. It sets the scenery. The Ammonites are coming. They're going to declare war. And we get this in chapter 10, verse 17. The Ammonites were called to arms. They encamped in Gilead, and the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So we left off with, who is this guy? And the question of Judges 10 is, will God actually liberate his people again? And because God gave the implication, he won't. He's as my parents said growing up, he's had it up to here, You didn't want it whenever mom and dad had it up to here. Even though my father was short, you didn't want him to have it up to here, They would also say that we were on their last nerve. My brother was the worst. They'd say, "Craig, you're on my last nerve and you're jumping." You're about to break that last nerve. But so the text ends with, well, maybe God won't deliver Israel. They're going to be wiped out by the Ammonites. And so that is the introduction to Jephthah. So we meet Jephthah in verses 1 to 3. It says here, now Jephthah the Gileadite, so you can already see the connection, right? It's the elders of the Gilead. It's going to try to figure out how we're going to repel these guys. So Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. That is hard on the English tongue. And Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So we get a decent biographical background on Jephthah here, and none of it is good. It is all bad. Let's start with his name. His name means the deity, or really it's he has opened. So the idea is that the deity has opened. And so the assumption here, it's describing opening of the womb. So he's likely named by his mother, who we'll talk about. And so what you have then is a mother celebrating, seeing that the gift of her son is a blessing, that despite her vocation, she has been gifted a son. So the deity has opened the wound. Now you'll notice there, it is an ambiguous name in the sense that what deity is in mind? It's he opens. Well, who's the he? And that's where the fun is. We don't know. And in fact, there's a lot of mystery about some of the backdrop of Jephthah, which actually I think enhances the story. So Jephthah is probably an abbreviated name. And scholars think that there would be the rest of the name would be the God that is in mind here. So you have basically three options. It would be Jephthah Yahweh, to use English, Jephthah Yahweh, Jephthah El, or Jephthah Baal. So it would be Yahweh opens, God, the generic name for God, El, or the Canaanite god, Baal. So being that it's he opens, right from the beginning we're thinking, okay, what kind of guy is this Jephthah guy? What kind of background does he come from? Just from his name. And we discover he has a father named Gilead. So he is a Gileadite whose father's name is Gilead. And most scholars agree that this would make his father kind of a nobleman, probably one of the elders of Gilead. He's a prominent figure. and which is ironic because the elders of Gilead will later come to recruit Jephthah to get help. Which is why he has the name Gilead. He gets the tribal clan name. And we also see he's not only just the son of a nobleman, he's the son of a harlot. So what's interesting is we are not told the ethnicity of his mother. She could be a Hebrew harlot, which would violate the law's condemnation of this practice. Because the Bible rightly sees this as an abuse upon women. It is men preying on women. And we live in a culture that is trying to normalize harlotry. And seems surprised whenever men abuse women of that profession. I don't know. Call me Christian, I guess, and have common sense. So she could be Jewish. She could be Canaanite, which violates the Mosaic law regarding intermarriage and having relations with Canaanites. She could also be a temple harlot, temple prostitute, which violates more of the Jewish law, the Mosaic law. So the mystery behind not just his name, but of his mother adds to it that it could just get worse and worse and worse. His name could be Baal Opens. His mother could be a temple prostitute that his nobleman father used for his own gratification. I mean, this could be just an awful, awful situation. But you'll notice how he is initially introduced here in verse 1. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. Now, this description is not unique in Judges. In fact, it's used one other time to describe Gideon. So the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. It's the same language used here. I believe David has the men of valor around him. So it's describing a warrior. Someone who is the strongest, the mightiest, the best in warfare and battle and all that sort of stuff. So despite his shame, he rises to the level of being a mighty warrior, which is not very many get that title in the Bible. However, his half-brothers come to him and at some point say, look, we don't want you around here. And basically their motivation is money. We don't want to have to share Dad's inheritance with you. Now, I read this and I wonder, has Gilead died? I don't know this. But being that they were talking about sharing the land, Father's land with you, I do wonder, has Gilead died? Because what happens later is the prominent men of Gilead, the elders of Gilead, they are the ones who will come to Jephthah. Right? It doesn't mention his father. So I do kind of wonder that, but I don't know. The text doesn't say. Now, can you think of a story where a prominent figure, say the head of a clan, sleeps with impregnates a woman of lesser power? Could we say that? And they have a child, and eventually that child is exiled from the clan. It is the story of Abraham and Hagar. And we see that here in Judges. Now, Hagar isn't a harlot, but she is a slave, and she is used against her own will to propagate the Abrahamic name, because she technically wouldn't have all the rights to her son, because that son becomes Abraham's, and all the inheritance, everything comes through the line of Abraham and Sarah, not Hagar. She's a surrogate mother, basically. And eventually, she is exiled. And that is an awful story. This is an awful story. Well, having been exiled by his family in verse 2, we come in verse 3, he flees to the land of Tob. Now, you'll notice there, it's not the city of Tob, it's not the country of Tob, it is the land of Tob. It's more a generic sort of area. Now, where I understand there's some mystery as to its exact location, some are more precise than others. But what's interesting is that the land of Tob means the land of goodness. So, of course, land of goodness strikes of Eden language. So here you have an exile finding a place of refuge, and it's the place of good, place of goodness. And of course, the irony there is he finds anything but good there. A couple things. One, he finds worthless fellows with him. Now, these are obviously bad dudes who do bad things, and he becomes their ringleader. The other thing is the ESV, be interested to see what your translation says. The ESV says they went out with him. Does anyone have the New King James Bible? All right, Danny? It says the word raid. I'll put them up here. These are the two I found. I didn't look at every available English translation. I ain't got that much time on my hands. But the major ones I looked at, and these two stuck out to me. Jephthah fled from his brothers, lived in the land of Tob. Then some worthless men joined Jephthah and went on raids with him. Same thing in the New King James. Well, that's the Christian Standard Bible, your Baptist Bible from Lifeway. So Jephthah and went out raiding with him. I actually think this captures the idea better than they just hung out together. They went from bar to bar. What you have here is a description that Jephthah, who is the son of a harlot and a nobleman, exiled from his family and home, he spends his days abroad as a pirate, a marauder, a Viking, a raider, whatever term you want to use. He is, now I've read conflicting because the geography, I don't have all that figured out. One resource says he's actually raiding Gilead. He's coming back home to raid them. Others saying he's raiding these other people. So just wherever he can get stuff, he goes. I don't know which one. But his lifestyle is that of a pirate, if you will. Of course, it's not water. He's on land. He goes in to take and destroy and to return home. A Viking. This is the hero of the story, by the way. This is the guy God's going to use. I know you're looking for the redemptive part. I wish you the best. And so one thing about his upbringing is it reveals how Israel more broadly has rebelled against God. He's exiled because of greed, but his birth is the result of sexual sin. And God condemns all of this. Now, what is interesting is the previous leader of Israel that we have in the narrative was Abimelech. Abimelech was a bad dude. The son of Gideon. Remember, Abimelech had his own brothers killed. He's a Cain character. He's eventually, he claims to be king, of course. And we watched that video last week. The millstones dropped in his head. I want you to notice the parallels. One is a son of a harlot. The other is the son of a concubine. Now, there's not a big difference there. Okay, I mean, there is. But you see that the concubine fits more the Hagar story in terms of how it works. But nevertheless, you can see they're not the son of the marriage. Also, the text uses the phrase only here in Judges for Abimelech and Jephthah that they surrounded themselves with worthless fellows. Same phrase is used. So we, the reader, okay, so we've got, okay, Abimelech's gone, good riddance to him. And then we meet these minor characters, and they're interesting. It's a period of peace, and then they rebel again, and God's thinking, you know what, I may not deliver you again. And then we introduce the story with another Abimelech. But actually, the story of Jephthah is worse than Abimelech. You remember that Abimelech, he wants to be king, right? But he's got to get rid of his brothers. What does he do? He goes home, and he rounds up them. And they're all like, well, if we're going to have someone lead us, it might as well be one of our own. So Abimelech can go home. Jephthah can't. So Jephthah is in worse shape than even Abimelech. And it looks like morally, relationally, he is in terrible shape. We could add here, both are sons of noblemen, Gideon and Gilead. Well, that is the introduction. I mean, this is it's not good. So we start then in verses 4 to 11, where we're going to eat some humble pie here. Verse 4, after a time the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, see the repetition, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, come and be our leader, that we might fight against the Ammonites. But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress? And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, that is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites, be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. And Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, the Lord will be witness against us if we do not do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. So, verse 4 summarizes most of chapter 10, the Ammonites are making war. Again, verse 5, the Ammonites are making war. And so they are in search of a ruler, is how chapter 10 ends. Now, the irony here is the guy they exiled is the guy they need to bring back. They look at all of their options, and they're just not very good. Now, again, if Jephthah has been raiding the Gileadites, this adds more irony on top of it. The guy who's been ruining their crops, stealing their resources, all that, is the guy they have to turn to be their deliverer. The guy that's made their life very difficult. Now, this seems like the enemy of my enemy is my friend situation, you know? Ever watch The Hobbit? I have to mention Tolkien. In The Hobbit is the Battle of the Five Armies. Jackson did a whole movie on it. It's like 2 sentences in the book. So you have the elves going against the dwarves, and then the men come because they all want the gold in the dragon's hoard. And you remember, they're fighting each other, killing each other. And then what happens? The orcs show up, and they stop fighting each other to fight this bigger enemy. And that's sort of what's happening here. You got a guy who's been exiled by the Gileadites. You've got the Gileadites, and they've been going at each other because there's a lot of anger and animosity. And then they said, you know what? We've got a bigger problem here. Let's hit pause. Let's deal with these guys, and then we'll come back. By the way, we call that the Cold War, right? We weren't friends with Russia. It's just whenever they decided to leave, because you remember the Soviet Union was originally with the Nazis until Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union. And they're like, well, I don't like this. Let's join the guys trying to kill the Nazis. Well, we were friends with the Soviets until the war ended. And right away, the secrecy, everything, we went right into the Cold War. So whenever Truman is finishing up the bomb, you know, he let Churchill know, but he wouldn't tell Stalin. Right? 'Cause we don't trust those guys, right? We're on the same team because we have a common enemy. But once that enemy's gone, we ain't on the same team. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so Israel, the Gileadites, they must be desperate. So the example I thought of here is this cat right here. Here's a good illustration. You remember this guy? Dennis Rodman. Not a fan. So the story goes that you remember that the Bulls, when Michael Jordan came, initially he was sort of a one-man show, and they couldn't get over the Pistons, and so they got Scottie Pippen, right? Finally they got Phil Jackson and, you know, talked to Michael Jordan, you need help. And so they got Scottie Pippen, good pick, among the others, Steve Kerr and all them. Well, eventually they figured out we need someone else who is unlike anyone else. And Rodman had played for the Pistons all those years, the Bad Boys, whatever they're called. And Jordan and Pippen and others come to Phil Jackson and say, we know what the missing piece is. It's this weirdo. And Phil Jackson says, the last thing you want on a team is a character like this. It is the last thing. A prima donna who wants all the cameras on them, they're unpredictable, they're not really a team player, a lot about the self, a crazy person. And Jordan assured Phil Jackson, we can manage him. And so here was a guy that they loathed for all those years, but because they had a certain goal they needed to reach, and they thought, we have to have this guy. We got to get more rebounds. We got to have the defensive side of it. They did. They got him, and he won 3 championships, whatever it was, with them. Well, this is Jephthah. Probably not a whole lot of difference, particularly when it comes to morality and other stuff. So what we get in verses 6 to 11 is the elders of Gilead and Jephthah, they negotiate. Now, I want you to notice this, verse 6. They said to Jephthah, come and be our leader. I trust is that what your translation says? Does anyone have a different translation? So, who would you have? You had commander? Commander. So here's the breakdown. Commander is NIV, New Living, all those. Mine says leader, ESV, New American Standard, 2 of my favorites. King James has captain. Now, I want you to notice this is where the Hebrew pulls things out better than the English does. Verse 6, they're offering him to be commander. We'll use that more prominent. Go to the end of chapter 10. Okay? Chapter 10 says, he shall be head over the inhabitants of Gilead. So in English, we're trying to draw it out, but it doesn't really pop. In the Hebrew, it pops. So what you have at the end of chapter 10 is the one who has absolute authority over the nation. This is a political role. So this is, for lack of a better term, let's say king. Okay, to use a tribal term. The word used here in chapter 11, when it's Jephthah they have to turn to, they don't want to make him king. That's the last thing they want. They want to make him commander-in-chief. So basically, they say, we don't want you over all of us. We'll give you authority over the military, the militia. So this one area will give you complete control. Not over everything. So they've downgraded the opening. And I think he's well aware of this. Okay, that's actually not a bad way of looking at it. They're going to make him the general there. So he says, verse 7, like, why in the world? Well, I come help you. You're the one who exiled me. And so they make the same request. And Jephthah ends up agreeing to their terms. Now, you'll notice in verse 10 through 11, they appeal to Yahweh. So verse 10, Yahweh will be witnesses against us. Later, it says that Jephthah spoke all his words before Yahweh at Mizpah. Now, I take this as a ceremonial statement rather than a theological statement. There's not a whole lot of evidence from what I can see that Jephthah is a pure worshiper of Yahweh. I think what you probably have in Israel is they would say their God is Yahweh. However, they've synchronized Judaism, the religion, with Canaanite religion. So I think they have one God overall, but then they have the worship of all these other gods. The Canaanite gods of agriculture and fertility and all these other things. I think that's what's happening. So when it comes to ceremony, okay, you want me to lead the army? Great, here's the deal. If I win, I get this job title. Now, the ceremony is you say these things, I think that's what's going on here. I mean, our coins as a nation still says, in God we trust. Do we? Do we as a nation? So that's the way I read it. I could be wrong. Okay, so verses 12 through 18 is when they go. So this quote I have, war is old men talking, young men dying. I stole that from the Troy movie. War is old men talking, young men dying. So instead of a war, what we get here, for the most part, is talking. This is weird in Judges. So let's start in verses 12 to 16. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, "What do you have against me that you have come to me to fight against my land?" And the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, "Because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land, from the Arnon to the Jabbok to the Jordan. Now therefore restore it peacefully." Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him, "Thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites, but when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, 'Please let us pass through the land.' But the king of Edom would not listen, and they sent also to the king of Moab, but he would not consent, so Israel remained at Kadesh." So a couple things to note here. One, these are the initial negotiations. So instead of just going to war, now that Jephthah is the head of the army, he goes as their representative and talks to the king of the Ammonites. It's worth noting, despite that he's not a king, he acts as if he is one. He is the Ammonite king's equal. So he'll say, "My land, why have you come up against me?" That's striking. Jephthah may have gotten more out of the deal than what they initially offered. And so he asked, why are you doing this to us? And the Ammonite king claims that the Hebrews stole their land, and they have come to get it back. That's their claim. And what you get starting in verse 14, going all the way down to verse 26, is that Jephthah's answer is that is historically, among other reasons, that is incorrect. So he makes three arguments against the Ammonite king. The first is, this is historically inaccurate. Verses 14 to 22, the Ammonite claim that this is their land is historically false. Israel avoided the territory of the Ammonites and Moabites because that's their cousins. So they kind of had to go around all that. And they were instructed by God to do that. And the reason they occupied Gilead had nothing to do with the Ammonites. It had to do with the Amorite king, King Sihon. This is Numbers 21. You go back and read it yourself. So Jephthah argues, look, here's the deal. We are here because that Amorite king took the first shot. We had to defend ourselves. And in order to keep peace, in order for us to survive, we had to take possession of the land. That's his argument. That's his main argument. So you can see the rest of it, verse 18. Then they journeyed through the wilderness, went around the land of Edom, the land of Moab, arrived on the east side of the land of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, "Please let us pass through your land to our country." But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through their territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. And the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all of his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. He said that if you have a problem, don't come to us. It's not your land to begin with. So you don't belong here. We have not come into your land. You are the one invading us. This was originally Amorite land until they attacked us. And then we had to defend ourselves. But he doesn't just stop there. He makes a historical argument. He makes a theological argument. Verses 23 to 24. So then Yahweh, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel. And are you to take possession from them? Will you not possess what Chemosh, your God, gives you to possess? And all that the Lord our God has dispossessed before us, we will possess. You see his argument here. Two things. One, ultimately, it is Yahweh, the God of Israel, who drove the Amorites from the land. And we believe he'll do it again. He gave it to us. And you're not going to take it from us. Now, you need to remember, in the ancient Near Eastern world, every nation had a main deity. The Canaanites had Baal. The Egyptians had Ra. The Israelites had Yahweh. Each of them had and that was the God of that land. And so what you have in these battles isn't just the battle of nations, it's a theological battle. The gods of the nations win the battle. So his first theological argument is, Yahweh gave us this land, and he intends to keep it. The other argument he makes is, this land was given to us by our God, and we are content with it. We're not going over to the land of Chemosh. You aren't content with the land your God gave. And if you're not content with that, don't come bothering me. Go talk to him. He's making a theological argument here. He finally makes a personal argument, verse 25. Now, are you any better than Balak the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? So this is a type of ad hominem attack where you attack someone personally. I like to think he's just talking smack. He is basically commanding the unnamed king, or he's asking the unnamed king, are you better than the previous kings who have tried to threaten us? I mean, Balak had a wild idea. Look how that backfired. You've got a wild idea. I think you better think twice about it. So if you were to read about Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, Numbers 22 to 24. So it's interesting, Jephthah makes two references to the books of Numbers. Do with that whatever you want. Not to Joshua, but to Numbers. That's just interesting. But then he makes a chronological argument, verses 26 to 27. While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and all the cities that are on the banks of Arnon, 300 years, why did you not deliver them within that time? I, therefore, have not sinned against you, and you do me wrong by making war on me. The Lord, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. Notice what he said there. He said, if you have a legitimate complaint about us stealing your land, it has been 300 long years. You seem a little late. It's a valid point. It's a valid point. However, verse 28, the king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words of Jephthah that he sent to him. It's like, I don't care. I don't care. Now, I do think it's worth pausing and considering that. You cannot rationalize with irrational, violent, malicious men. You cannot do it. When someone decides to do something wicked, I wish you the best in rationalizing with them. I've told you all the story before when I was a substitute teacher in Brett County. Because I had a master's, they asked me to do some of the troubled kids. It wasn't alternative school, but it was sort of the step before that. And I had this kid, I've told this before, he kind of got in a tiff during lunch. And he was the testosterone for a seventh grader was just rolling, right? And seventh graders are loopy anyways. And he's just, I told him, typical boys do. And all I want to say is, okay, with all that said, what now? Well, he no. Okay, fine. You proved your point. What are you going to do now? Right. And I'm sitting there trying to you need to calm down, and you need to start thinking rationally because where you're heading is dumb. This is you got to get a hang of this. This is you are beyond rationally with, and people who get to that point are dangerous. Here's a guy with an army who's invading because he wants the land. He wants it. He just wants it. And so here you have Jephthah, despite his best efforts of leaving, is now being drawn in, and he has to defend the land he has been cast out of. I mean, in that part, it's a good story. So this is where we want to introduce this, but we are not going to solve this riddle until next week, where we will still not solve it, okay? So what we get in verses 29 to 40 is the vow, the infamous vow, the most famous part of the story of Jephthah. So it happens in two parts. We get the giving of the vow, the war, which is where hopefully we can conclude, and then we get the outcome of the vow. And that outcome is where, I don't know what to do with it. Okay, verse 29. We'll start here. The Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the Ammonites, Jephthah, skip the line, okay. In peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So Jephthah crossed over the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. And he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel-Keramim with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Okay, so we are ready for battle, but before we go to battle, the story is delayed again. Right? So chapter 10 ends with the armies are lining up. Chapter 11's been with, they got to find someone to fight, to lead them in battle. So, okay, we find someone, then he goes has a conversation with them, and now he's rounding up the troops. I mean, it's just delay after delay after delay after delay. It's good storytelling. So what he's doing is he is going around the land. He's focusing on certain tribes, which will come back to haunt him in chapter 12 with the Ephraimites, because he doesn't recruit them. And that leads to a civil war. So he's going around and he's building an army. This is what you get in England during the War of the Roses and other times is, okay, I own all these lands. I'm going to go around and build an army, and I'm going to fight the king. What does the king do? He has to go, well, these are my lands. I'm going to build my army, and I'm going to repel them. And you get this over and over and over again. So he's going around some of the nearest tribes, and he's building an army. Verse 29 is interesting. It says that the Spirit of the Lord is with Jephthah. Now, this, to me, is where it gets complicated. This is where it gets complicated. Because this phrase, it's not unique to Jephthah, but it does show up in certain times in Judges. Let me give you a few. Judges 3, this is Othniel. The Spirit of the Lord was upon Othniel. Othniel is one of the good guys. Judges 6 is Gideon. The Spirit of the Lord is on Gideon. And then Judges 13, it is on Samson. Now, that phrase is given to Samson. I think I got another one here for Samson. Like 4 or 5 times, something like that. So this phrase is often given. So you remember when Samson is, he's got his eyes gouged out, right? And he's putting his hands on the pillars. I believe that's one of the instances where, he prays and it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and he pushed, So that phrase is found a lot with Samson. But it is applied to Jephthah. And this becomes a problem with this vow, okay? At least the way I'm reading it. It's one of the ways I've struggled with it. But he makes this vow in verses 30 to 31. I want you to look at your Bibles and see what your translation says. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites in my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Okay, so This is the only thing people remember about Jephthah. The only thing they remember. He is a son of a harlot, and he made a foolish vow. This is, I mean, I like the Shibboleth story in chapter 12, just because I'm a West Wing fan. But other than that, we don't think much about Jephthah. It is interesting that here, Jephthah speaks directly to God. Now, let's think of the story of Jephthah so far. It opens, not opens, but the story really picks up with this war. He talks to the elders of Gilead, and he gets everything that he wants. Everything. Then he talks to the king of the Ammonites. He gets nothing that he wants. Now he talks to God. And in the text, he gets silence. Because what's the question of the text? You know, when we talk about Jephthah, we're actually missing the broader point. Will God deliver Israel? And everything we have about Jephthah would imply, why would he? They had to search long and hard for a good leader. And the only guy they could come up with was the son of a harlot who is a pirate against his own people. Yeah, he's pretty good with history. Can make quite a good theological and political and chronological arguments. He knows his way with words. But my lands, this guy is wicked. He has the audacity to test the Lord. Now, to be clear, he's not the only person to make a vow with God. I'll give you some of the other examples that I came across. This is Jacob. Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me, will keep me, this is when he's fleeing his brother and all that, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone, right? So remember, he has that dream, sets up the stone as a sort of pillar. Then there is also Israel. And Israel vowed a vow. That phrase, vowed a vow, shows up in other places. If you will give this people my hand, I'll devote their cities to destruction. Hannah, remember the story of Hannah who gives birth to Samuel? Remember she says, she vowed a vow, if you give me a baby, I will dedicate him to the Lord. And so he'll become a Nazirite. Samson is a Nazirite. He's a permanent Nazirite, so his hair is never to be cut. Nazirite's usually sort of like think of no shave November. You shave it, but then you don't shave it, after that. That's what the Nazirite vow is. Paul shaved his head, cut his hair. But then the idea is you don't cut it. You let it grow long for a time. And then there is Absalom, actually. He vowed a vow that if the Lord will bring me back to Jerusalem, I will offer worship to the Lord. So it's not that the vows are bad, but he is going to the God Israel has abandoned. And the question is, will God abandon Israel? It's a scary, scary question in the text. And we can't miss that. Now, all right, let's look at our Bibles. So verse 30 and 31, is find your translation. I did all the homework for you. Does your Bible say whatever or whoever? What do you got? Whatever. You got whatever. Does anyone have whoever? Anyone have... Well, I doubt. No one has the Christian Standard Bible, the Lifeway. So your curriculum for Sunday school is probably Christian Standard Bible. It used to be King James on one side, Holman Christian Standard on the other. I haven't looked at Sunday school material for a while. I assume that's still that case. Maybe not. Whoever. What's that? Whoever. So you've got whoever. What are you looking at? That's the CS. It's Christian. Okay, Christian Standard. Yeah. So the Net Bible is probably my favorite Bible. I don't think they get everything right. I like the footnotes of the Net Bible. That's a big part of why I like it. But no one reads it, but I absolutely love it. Even though places it's weird. They use whoever. Now, I don't know the Hebrew here. This is a common word used like 5,000 times in the Hebrew Bible. I think, given context, it should be whoever. Here's what I suspect. This is not thus says the Lord, because I don't know enough about Hebrew. I suspect we translate it whatever to soften it. Because at the end of the day, God uses a man who, for the sake of argument, we will explore this more next week, very likely sacrifices his daughter. An act that God condemns elsewhere in the Bible. You can soften that if you make it whatever, to sound as if he's expecting an animal sacrifice. I think that's why our translations do this. It's to soften that implication. God, I'm going to sacrifice whoever comes out of there. And we'll talk about this. I think Tim Keller may actually be on to something. We can talk about it next week. So here's the question we have. What is he expecting? So either he's expecting an animal to come out the door or a human to come out of that door. This is where the debate is. Okay? And there are people on both sides who love Jesus in the Bible. And so we're not going to solve it all. We can come back to it next week when we look at verses 34 to the end of the chapter. So if he's expecting an animal, here's the argument for it. One, the phrase burnt offerings in the Old Testament almost always refers to animals. So he says, whoever, whatever comes out of the door, I offer as a burnt offering. That is almost always in reference to animals. There are two other exceptions. One is Abraham offering Isaac. That is a clear exception to the rule. The other is when Mesha sacrifices his son, I think in 2 Kings. That is clearly a pagan story. Clearly. Okay. Also, it is clear the Old Testament condemns human sacrifice. Just absolutely condemns it. If you want references, and this is just a few, Leviticus 18:21, Leviticus 21:5, 1 Kings 11:7, 2 Kings 23:10, Jeremiah 32:35, and others. And this is particularly noteworthy, I believe, because the text says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. That phrase just lingers so large. I just struggle with this text. I don't have all the answers to it. But there are good arguments to say that he was expecting a human to come out of that door. Let me give you two reasons why. One, Jephthah is clearly grieving when his daughter comes out to greet him. If he's expecting an animal, all he would have to say, hey, baby girl, go get the lamb. But when she comes out, it's, oh no, what have I done? And we should note that Jephthah is the son of a man who has many kids. He seems to have one child. He is the child of a harlot. He seems to have a child only with a wife, from what we can tell. So when his only daughter comes out, which is in a version of the Abraham story, then he offers her. The other reason to consider that he does expect a human to come out of those doors is, in ancient customs, animals don't run out of the door. Don't read this as a city folk in America, where we have more animals than we have children. By the way, that is a fact in your large metropolitan centers. Seattle, when we went to Washington, D.C., I pointed this out to the kids. I said, I want you all to make a note. How many dogs do you see? How many kids do you see? Everyone's walking dogs. No one's walking children. It's true. It's true. And look, I'm a country bumpkin, okay? Frankfort's heading that direction. I think we love our animals too much, but that's offensive. So we'll move on. Okay. But anyways, I know. That's crossing the line. But where you do see a fluency, you will see a love for animals and a decline of births. You do see that, by the way. Anyways, but animals don't come out to greet conquerors. You want to know who does? Women. I can prove it to you in the Bible. Right? In Numbers 15, then Miriam the prophetess. So this is not. Okay, never mind. So Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out with their tambourines and dancing. So what does you have? The men go and conquer, and when they return home, the women celebrate. Here's another example in 1 Samuel, story of David. And they were coming home when David returned from striking down the Philistine. The women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, songs of joy with musical instruments. If you go to the story of Judges, or Deborah, in Judges 5, I skipped it for sake of time, but I'm doing it anyways. You remember the song of Deborah? And in the song, the mother of Sisera is saying, where is my son? Where is he? Oh, when he comes home, I will go out and sing and dance upon his arrival. So, who will be the first person to come out of that door when he is victorious? I think it implies what he is expecting is a human. Now, I could be wrong on that. However, with that said, we get a summary of the battle in verses 32 to 33. the main thing is the end of verse 33, the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Jephthah is victorious. And so we now, the reader, are thinking, what's coming out of that door? You have to read as if you haven't read it before. Who is coming out of that door? Okay, so what's the point? What is the point? Well, I mentioned the main point thus far of Jephthah is Israel has abandoned God. Has God abandoned Israel? And the answer is found there at the end of verse 33. Despite the sort of person that Jephthah is, even that couldn't keep God from delivering his people. Now, if you can fathom that, I think you can fully fathom the love of God. Now, that is good news because you and I need that message. There is nowhere we could go where we are beyond the reach of God's divine love. Now, I don't get all of this stuff with Jephthah, and that's probably why it's such a good text. Because I can't understand why God would use someone like him. Maybe that should cause me to really contemplate about how deep the Father's love for us is. It is so deep that he would offer a whoever on our behalf. He would take the life of his own son so that we may know the depth of God's love. That's something we're thinking about. Well, Danny, did we miss anything? Yeah, it's a wild story. Don?
Where did they have the tambourine when he was
One of my study notes says that he wasn't raised up as the other judges were.
As the other what?
As the other judges were, or the other warriors were.
Yeah.
He was commissioned, not raised up.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting point. Yeah.
God acquiesced in letting God acquiesced the request, even though it was inappropriate. God not any judge or any king was to be Israel's prime warrior.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. God is really having to stoop down to. One story that comes to mind when Abraham is wanting God to spare Sodom and the rest of the cities because Lot's there. You remember he goes through, if there's 50 righteous, if there's 10 righteous, all the way down. You read the story, if Jephthah is the best they can find, the story is like, what if there are 0 righteous there? Will you still deliver Israel? And that's a thought worth meditating upon. Hey, Danny.
I just got kind of wonder about his vow. You know, I see it as being presumptuous.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a presumptuous vow. And in Numbers, it talks about being presumptuous and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
See, he got all this stuff given to him that he asked for, and I guess that guy was on cloud nine. Well, I'm just going along with a lot more I can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, I don't know.
Yeah. So you could probably tell I lean towards he's going to offer his daughter. Now, I'm going to read more about it next week because I do want to look into the virginity argument. We were talking about that Monday.
That's what I think.
So I'm wanting to read more on that. So I'm not definitive here, but I'm leaning in that direction. But I don't want that to be my conclusion. You know, have you ever read the Bible like that before? You know, or just an email from your coworker. But that's where I'm leading, and I just don't like it. I just don't like it. And chapter 12 is not much better with Jephthah. He's not a good guy. But remember that it gets worse as you go through Judges. Samson isn't any better. One of the reasons why we almost tolerate Samson is because Samson commits the sins that we commit. He's a disobedient womanizer. We can tolerate that, and it's over and over and over again he breaks the will of God. And yet God still delivers Israel. There's good news in that. God will deliver his people. And he is a true and better Jephthah. Fully righteous. Of course, the son isn't just offered, he gives of his own life. His life isn't taken, it is laid down. He is a true and better Jephthah. He's a true and better Jephthah's daughter. All right, we got to get out of here. How about, Danny has the head. Will you close?